They laughed because the machine lit up for the wrong man. The first thing Ethan Cole noticed was the floor. Not the towering white columns. Not the rows of floating banners stitched from light. Not even the alien council seated high above him like carved statues from some older, colder religion. Just the floor. Smooth black glass under his knees, polished so clean he could see the blur of his own face staring back at him, pale and thin and already losing dignity by the second. Around him, the hall of selection glowed with a sterile kind of beauty. Frost-white light poured from the ceiling in long vertical sheets. Silver mist drifted around the base of the chamber. Somewhere overhead, hidden engines hummed with the low steady note of power held on a leash. The sound got into his ribs. It made his heartbeat feel small. Ethan swallowed and tasted metal. The air smelled like ozone, hot wires, and something medicinal, as if the whole room had been scrubbed down to remove anything soft or human. He was one of 12 candidates brought from Earth, though candidate was a generous word for what they had made them into. The others stood in a line to his left, broad-shouldered, clean-jawed, hand-picked for military, research, and elite adaptive programs. They wore fitted gray trial uniforms and the kind of stillness that came from training. Ethan wore the same uniform, but on him it looked borrowed. The sleeves sat loose around his wrists. The collar pressed against a throat that seemed too narrow for the room. He had always looked like someone assembled from spare parts and late apologies. 5'10". 142 pounds on a good day. A maintenance tech from Ohio with an old nerve condition, a medical file thick enough to make recruiters laugh, and exactly zero reason to be kneeling in front of the most important alien relic anyone had seen in 2 centuries. But there he was. One human among many. The weakest among all. A faint ripple of amusement moved through the audience tiers. It didn't sound cruel at first. Just soft clicks, translated whispers, restrained amusement behind elegant masks and luminous eyes. Still, Ethan understood the shape of mockery in any language. He kept his gaze low. Kept breathing. Kept his hands open on the glass so no one would see the tremor in them. At the center of the hall, 50 feet away, the neural link rose from a circular dais like a spine made of moonlight. Rings of translucent material turned around a suspended core, each rotation smooth and silent, each pulse of pale blue light reflected in the glossy floor. It was smaller than the stories made it sound. Not a throne. Not a weapon. More like a waiting thing. Ancient. Patient. Dangerous in the quiet way deep water was dangerous. Ethan had heard 100 theories on the transport shuttle. That it chose a warrior. That it amplified intelligence. That it merged with the strongest nervous system in the room and turned one life into command over fleets, cities, worlds. He hadn't believed any of it. Men like him were never chosen by history. They were usually the ones sweeping up after it. A sharp voice cut through the chamber. Candidate 12. Raise your head. Ethan looked up because he had to. That was when he saw her clearly for the first time. Commander Vaelira Thorne stood on the upper descent of the central platform, still as if gravity itself had asked permission before touching her. Her uniform was midnight blue edged in silver, severe and exact, fitted to a frame that carried authority like it had been born there. Her skin held a deep blue tone under the white light, smooth and cool as polished stone. Her eyes, narrow and bright, stayed on him without warmth, without curiosity, without anything that could be mistaken for mercy. He had seen officers before. Human and otherwise. He knew the look of someone measuring value. In hers, he found none for him. Ethan pushed himself up from his knees. His legs almost locked halfway, and a few of the observers let out another low murmur when he steadied himself a beat too late. Vaelira did not react. Name, she said. Ethan Cole. His voice sounded wrong in the hall. Too plain. Too earth. Occupation. Maintenance technician, systems repair. One silver brow lifted by half an inch. That tiny movement said more than laughter could. Not a soldier. Not a scholar. A repairman. Something passed between the officials seated behind her, quiet and dismissive. Ethan felt heat crawl up the back of his neck. He knew what they saw. A body too slight. Hands too unsteady. Shoulders that had never learned how to take up space. A human who looked less like a savior than a man who apologized when someone else bumped into him. Then the light in the hall changed. It happened so suddenly the breath in Ethan's chest seemed to stop with it. The rotating rings around the neural link slowed by a fraction. A soft blue shimmer deepened to something brighter, older, almost watchful. The floor beneath his boots gave off a faint vibration, delicate as a pulse under skin. The room fell silent. Not respectful silence. Startled silence. Ethan frowned and turned toward the dais. The suspended core had brightened. Not for the first candidate at the front of the line. Not for the decorated Marine with the scarred jaw or the NASA biointerface specialist or the Olympic-built security contractor everyone had been staring at since arrival. For him. For Ethan. For the weak one. And in the strange breathless stillness of that impossible second, every eye in the hall shifted at once. Commander Valeira Thorne did not move for 3 full seconds, and in that hall, 3 seconds felt longer than a prayer. The blue light from the neural link sharpened around Ethan Cole until the air itself seemed cut into pieces by it. Every polished surface in the chamber threw the glow back at him. It traced the narrow line of his shoulders, the pale strain in his face, the faint tremor in the hand he had forgotten to close. He looked less like a chosen man than a patient standing in the wrong operating room. Somewhere high above, one of the counselors spoke in a language Ethan did not know, low and clipped and much too fast. Another voice answered from the opposite tier. Then another. The whispers spread in widening circles, not loud, but impossible to ignore. The room was no longer looking at him with amusement. It was looking at him with disruption. Valeira stepped down 1 level from the platform, and the silver edge of her uniform caught the light like a blade drawn halfway. Her face remained composed, but Ethan saw something new in it now. Not respect. Not yet. Calculation, sharpened by concern. Remain still, she said. The translator band at Ethan's neck softened the alien consonants into clean English, though the authority in her voice needed no help. Ethan obeyed at once. He was good at that. Good. At following instructions. Good at staying out of the way. The problem was that his body had begun to feel strangely far from him. The floor vibrated under his boots in tiny regular pulses, each one rising through bone and tendon like someone tapping lightly on the inside of his ribs. He tried to steady his breathing, but each breath came thinner than the last. The glowing rings around the neural link turned with measured grace, and with every rotation the chamber grew quieter, as if the machine were not only taking power from the room but taking sound with it too. The first candidate in line, a broad-shouldered man with military posture and calm eyes, glanced toward Ethan with open disbelief. The second candidate looked insulted. The third actually took a half step back, as though weakness might be contagious. Ethan would have laughed if he had enough air for it. He had spent most of his life being overlooked. Passed over in school, in work assignments, in rooms where stronger people spoke first and longer and with greater confidence. Invisible was a familiar shape. This was worse. Being seen by the wrong people at the wrong time had its own kind of danger. Diagnostics, Valeira said, not to him but to the technicians at the lower ring. Instantly, translucent screens bloomed into the air around the dais, layered with symbols, waveforms, anatomical diagrams, and strings of glowing script Ethan could not read. Their light flickered across Valeira's face, and for the first time the perfect stillness of her expression cracked by a fraction. Her eyes narrowed. She was not looking at the machine anymore. She was looking at the way it was looking at him. This cannot be correct, one of the counselors said through the public channel, the translator rendering the sentence into precise American English above the hall. The relic has not completed preselection. Another voice answered, colder. It is responding. That is enough. Ethan wished neither of them sounded so afraid. He turned his head toward the neural link, only a few degrees, because Veilira had told him to remain still and some primitive part of him still cared about being cooperative even under cosmic scrutiny. The suspended core brightened as if it had noticed the movement. A wave of pale blue passed through the rotating rings. The vibration in the floor reached his knees. Now. He felt it in his teeth. Then, without warning, the smell in the chamber changed. The sterile ozone sharpened into something warmer, almost like rain hitting hot pavement in July. Home, in a strange broken way. Ethan blinked. For one impossible instant, the white chamber blurred. He saw not columns but shadows moving behind glass. Not counselors but outlines. A corridor. A hand against a transparent wall. A woman's voice, distant and frayed, speaking words he could not fully hear. The image vanished so fast he almost doubted it had happened. He swayed. Veilira was in front of him before he understood she had moved. She did not touch him, but her presence cut off the hall from view. Up close, she seemed even more exact, every line deliberate, every breath controlled. Her eyes searched his face with the focus of someone trying to catch a system failure before it spread. "What did you see?" she asked. Ethan swallowed. His throat was dry. "I do not know." That, at least, was true. Her gaze held on him 1 second longer than comfort allowed. Then the neural link let out a sound. It was not loud. It did not shake the hall or crack the glass or call thunder from the ceiling. It was softer than that. More intimate. A single clear tone, almost musical, as if some hidden chamber inside it had opened after centuries of staying sealed. Every screen in the room shifted at once. The symbols racing across them changed color. Technicians stiffened. A counselor rose from his seat. And Ethan, who had never once been the center of any room worth remembering, felt the entire future tilt 1 impossible inch in his direction. The clear tone hung in the hall long after it should have faded, as if the sound had gone somewhere deeper than air and found a place to stay. No one spoke at first. Even the whispering officials in the upper tiers seemed to understand that they were standing too close to something older than rank. Ethan Cole stood where Commander Veilira had told him to stand, shoulders tense, hands open at his sides, while the glow from the neural link moved across his skin in slow breathing waves. It did not feel like heat. It felt like attention. The first of the elite candidates was called forward anyway. Ceremony had its own momentum, and institutions rarely stopped just because reality had become inconvenient. The man stepped onto the circular dais with the measured confidence of someone who had spent years preparing to be chosen. He was tall, broad through the chest, calm in the deliberate way that looked impressive from a distance. The technicians aligned the suspended rings around him. A soft field rose from the floor, blue and transparent, wrapping his body in a thin lattice of light. For 1 second the hall seemed willing to pretend this was normal again. Then the core dimmed. Not violently. Not dramatically. It simply lost interest. The rings slowed, flashed once, and returned to their baseline rotation. A line of data on the nearest screen went gray. The candidate looked up, confused, then stepped back under orders he clearly did not enjoy receiving. The second candidate followed, then the third. One by one they entered the field, and one by one the ancient machine refused them with the same quiet indifference. No alarms. No thunder. Just absence. It was somehow more humiliating that way. One woman with a record in adaptive cognition lasted nearly 6 seconds before the lattice around her flickered out. Another candidate triggered a brief pulse of gold across the outer ring, enough to make several counselors lean forward, but the core went dark again before the technicians could stabilize the readout. Each failure tightened the room by another notch. Ethan could feel it in the silence. Feel it in the way the attendants moved faster now, as if speed might force order back into place. Through all of it, the neural link kept returning to that faint low shimmer whenever he drew breath. Commander Valeira noticed. Ethan knew she noticed because she had gone very still again, and he was beginning to understand that stillness was never emptiness with her. It was pressure held under discipline. She spoke quietly to a technician beside the dais. New screens appeared. Human biometric overlays opened in the air, rotating slowly, each one centered on Ethan. His heart rate. His nerve conductivity. Oxygen variation. Old scar tissue near the base of his spine from an injury he had gotten at 16 fixing a collapsed garage motor with his uncle. Data he had forgotten was inside him was now hovering 10 feet high for an entire alien tribunal to inspect. Ethan resisted the urge to fold in on himself. Final candidate, one of the officials announced, and the translator gave the words a flatness that made them sound almost ceremonial, almost merciful. Ethan realized a half-second too late that they meant him. The sound in the hall changed. It was not laughter this time. It was worse. It was anticipation mixed with disbelief, the emotional equivalent of strangers watching a bridge they expect to collapse. Ethan's mouth went dry. He looked toward Valeira. He did not know why. Maybe because she had been the first person to ask him what he saw instead of what he was worth. Maybe because everyone else in the room seemed to want a result, and she seemed to want the truth, even if she did not like what it might cost. Her gaze met his. "Step forward, Ethan Cole," she said. No mockery. No softness either. Just command, clean and sharp. He obeyed. The black glass under his boots gave way to the silver-white surface of the dais, and the moment he crossed the inner ring, the suspended core flared so bright the nearest screens washed pale. The rotating bands accelerated in perfect alignment. Symbols he had never seen in his life poured across them like liquid constellations. A breath moved through the chamber, hundreds of people reacting at once and trying not to sound afraid. Ethan stopped at the center mark. The field rose around him before any technician gave the order. Blue light climbed from the floor to his shoulders, then above his head, sealing into a transparent column. His pulse hammered in his throat. The strange rain-on-pavement smell returned, stronger now, mixed with cold metal and something almost sweet beneath it, like a memory trying to become physical. He heard the hum of the chamber fall away. Heard his own breathing. Heard, somewhere very close and impossibly far, the beginning of a woman's voice. At last, it whispered, and Ethan forgot the council, the candidates, the hall, and even the fear, because whatever was inside the light had not chosen him by mistake. The voice did not come through Ethan Cole's ears. It moved through him the way cold moves through a windowpane in winter, silent and total, there before you fully realize the room has changed. At last. The words lingered inside the blue column around him, soft as breath against glass. Ethan forgot to inhale. The chamber beyond the light blurred at the edges. Commander Valeira stood only a few feet away, one hand lifted toward a control rail, her posture rigid with command, but even she seemed farther now, as if the machine had placed a great clear distance between him and everything ordinary. The suspended rings above him turned faster, their pale glow deepening into bands of blue so rich they almost looked liquid. Symbols streamed across the floating displays in dense, unreadable sheets. Technicians began speaking over one another in clipped bursts, their voices tight with something more serious than surprise. Ethan should have been listening. He should have been afraid. Instead, he was focused on the strange second heartbeat rising through the floor. It matched nothing in his body, and yet his pulse kept trying to fall into step with it. One beat. Then another. Then a long luminous pause. The air inside the field smelled less like ozone now and more like rain on hot pavement after a dry summer week back in Ohio. It was impossible. There was no rain here. No pavement. No summer heat shimmering above asphalt. But memory had slipped into the chamber anyway, carrying warmth on its back. Ethan blinked, and the hall disappeared. Not fully. Just enough. He saw a corridor made of translucent walls, blue-white and impossibly tall, curving away into shadow. He saw reflections moving on those walls like distant figures passing behind ice. He saw a hand pressed flat against a clear surface from the other side. Slender. Blue. Trembling. The image sharpened for one impossible second, and a woman's face appeared beyond the glass, blurred by light but unmistakably there. Her eyes were wide with exhaustion. Not fear for herself. Fear for something that had already gone wrong. "Do not let them use me again," she said, and this time Ethan heard every word. The vision snapped away so fast it left him unsteady. He staggered half an inch. The blue field around him brightened in response, not as a warning, but as if it were holding him up. His throat tightened. "Use me." The phrase landed wrong. Heavy. Human enough to hurt. "He is receiving active imprint," one of the technicians said, the translation rolling through hidden speakers over the chamber floor. Another voice answered from the upper tier, harsher now. "Sever the sequence before integration." Ethan turned his head toward the sound and immediately regretted it. The movement sent a sharp pulse through his spine, not pain exactly, but too much information all at once. For an instant he felt the temperature of the room in layers. The cold polished floor beneath his shoes. The warmth of his own blood moving through two narrow veins. The clean chill of the silver restraints built into the dais, still unused. And somewhere under all of it, buried deep, a grief so old it had become architecture. "Hold position," Commander Veilira said. Her voice cut cleanly through the confusion. Ethan looked at her. She had moved closer to the edge of the field now, close enough that the blue light painted itself over the sharp lines of her face. For the first time since he had seen her, certainty was missing from her expression. Not gone. Just cracked. Her eyes moved over the readings, then back to him, studying him with the hard concentration of someone watching the rules of her world change in real time. "Ethan," she said, using his first name for the first time, and the sound of it startled him almost as much as the machine had. "Tell me exactly what you heard." He swallowed. The answer felt dangerous before he even spoke it. "A woman," he said quietly. "She told me not to let them use her again." Silence fell so completely across the hall that Ethan could hear the faint electric hiss of the displays overhead. One of the counselors rose from his seat. Another closed his hands over the armrests as if holding himself still by force. Veilira did not look away from Ethan, but something colder entered the room anyway, some truth too close to the surface now to remain buried. Then the neural link changed again. The rings opened outward in perfect unison, like a flower made of light unfolding after centuries of night, and every screen in the chamber filled with the same single line in bright white translation, "Primary compatibility confirmed." The words on the screens remained suspended above the chamber like a verdict no one had prepared to hear. "Primary compatibility confirmed." Ethan Cole stared at the bright translation until the letters lost shape, until they were nothing but white light pressed against his eyes. The blue field around him had gone nearly transparent now, but he could still feel it, a fine living pressure over his skin like cool water held an inch away from contact. Beyond it, the hall of selection no longer looked ceremonial. It looked fractured. Technicians moved too quickly. Counselors spoke too quietly. The confidence had drained out of the room and left behind something colder. Commander Veilira Thorne stepped closer to the field and lifted one hand. This time the machine did not resist her. The column around Ethan thinned and folded inward in clean lines, dissolving into drifting ribbons of light that vanished before they reached the floor. He was free to move again, but his legs did not trust the idea. The dais seemed farther from the hall than it had a minute ago. He took one slow breath, then another, the taste of rain and metal still lingering at the back of his throat. "Escort him to containment," said a counselor from above. The public translation came a half-beat later, emotionless and final. Ethan looked up. "Containment. Not quarters. Not recovery. Not debriefing. The word landed with the cold precision of a door locking somewhere he could not yet see. Veilira did not answer immediately. Her gaze moved once to the nearest display, reading through layers of data faster than Ethan could have followed even in English, then back to him. "He is unstable from first contact," she said. "Improper handling could damage the imprint." The counselor's response came sharper. "Then preserve the imprint." Ethan felt the meaning in that sentence long before he fully understood it. The chamber attendants approached from either side of the dais, not aggressively, but with the efficient caution of people handling something valuable that might also be dangerous. Ethan stepped down before they could guide him. It was a small act, barely an act at all, but it mattered to him. He still had his own legs. The black glass floor felt colder now, and the tremor in his right hand had returned with enough force that he tucked it against his side. As they began leading him toward the side passage beneath the council tiers, the other candidates watched in absolute silence. Some looked offended. Some looked relieved. One looked almost sorry, though Ethan could not tell whether the feeling was for him or for a future that had just slipped away. The doors opened with a hush. The corridor beyond was narrow, silver-white, and so clean it seemed untouched by breath. Panels of soft blue light ran along the floor instead of the ceiling, turning every footstep into a moving shadow. Ethan counted them without meaning to. 12 steps to the first security threshold. Another 18 to the lift chamber. The habit was old. When life stopped making sense, he counted practical things. Bolts. Panels. Steps. Anything measurable felt safer than destiny. Veilira entered the lift with him. The attendants remained outside. The doors sealed, shutting out the hall and its staring hundreds in one clean motion. For the first time since the ceremony began, there was no audience. Only the hum of the lift, the faint pulse of systems moving beneath the deck, and the strange closeness of the alien officer standing less than 3 feet away. Up close, her silence felt different here. Not ceremonial. Not public. Searching. Ethan kept his eyes on the brushed metal seam of the opposite wall. "Did you know?" he asked quietly. Veilira did not pretend to misunderstand. "No," her answer came at once. He nodded once. He believed her. That surprised him more than the answer itself. The lift descended another level. The blue strip lighting shifted darker as they went lower into the structure. Ethan rubbed his thumb over the edge of his palm, grounding himself in the small rough texture of his own skin. "She sounded afraid," he said. Veilira turned her head. "Who?" He looked at her then. There was no point keeping it back. Not after the screens. Not after the word containment. The woman in the link. For the first time since he met her, Commander Veilira Thorne let her control slip by the smallest visible measure. Not enough for anyone else to call it fear. But enough for Ethan to see that whatever waited below them, she had not expected the machine to remember a voice. Level 12 felt colder than the hall above, though Ethan Cole could not tell whether that came from the climate systems or from what the place had been built to hide. The lift opened onto a corridor so quiet it seemed insulated from history itself. The walls were made of matte silver panels without ornament, interrupted only by thin vertical seams of blue light that rose from floor to ceiling like frozen signals. No banners. No public displays. No ceremonial grandeur. Whatever happened down here was not meant to be admired. It was meant to be controlled. Commander Veilira Thorne stepped out first, and Ethan followed because there was nowhere else to go. 2 security doors opened in sequence as they approached, each one responding to her presence with a soft descending tone. The sound reminded Ethan of hospital equipment after midnight, when everything was quiet enough that machines started to feel like the people in charge. He kept counting steps. 14 to the first checkpoint. 9 more to the second. The floor beneath his shoes was not glass here but some dense composite with a faint textured grain, designed to silence movement. It worked. The only sounds were the hush of ventilation and the low distant thrum of the structure around them, as if the station itself were breathing in its sleep. At the end of the corridor waited a room with no visible windows and a single table fixed to the floor. One chair on either side. A panel of pale light ran along the ceiling, bright enough to erase shadows. Ethan stopped in the doorway. He knew an interview room when he saw one, even on another world. Veolira turned toward him. "This is temporary." Ethan almost smiled at that. Temporary was one of those words institutions used when they wanted fear to stay polite. He stepped inside anyway. The room smelled clean in the sterile way the hall had, but there was something else beneath it now, faint and metallic, like circuitry warming behind walls too thick to trust. On the far side of the chamber, a seamless section of silver darkened and became transparent. Glass. Or something close enough. Behind it stood three figures in formal council attire, their faces partly obscured by reflected light. Watching without entering. Ethan looked away before they could mistake eye contact for permission. Veolira noticed. "They will observe only," she said. "That is supposed to make me feel better." The question came out more tired than sharp. Her expression did not change, but she dismissed the transparent panel with one touch across a wall control. The glass frosted opaque again. A small mercy. Or maybe just privacy for more efficient questioning. She remained standing while Ethan lowered himself into the chair opposite the table. The metal seat was colder than he expected. His body had started to catch up. With the last hour now. His hands were unsteady. There was a pressure behind his eyes, not pain exactly, but the threat of it. Every few seconds he still felt that second heartbeat under everything, soft and patient, as if some hidden system had not stopped syncing with him when the field came down. Veolira placed a narrow device on the table between them. It projected a thin ribbon of light, translating ambient speech and mapping physiological responses. Ethan recognized enough of the setup to know she was giving him a cleaner channel than the one used in the hall. More direct. Less public. "You will answer clearly," she said. "I will ask only once where it matters." He nodded. She studied him for a moment in silence, and Ethan had the strange sense that she was not deciding whether he was lying. She was deciding which truth would cost less to hear first. Describe the voice. Ethan looked down at his own hands. Pale knuckles. Fine tremor. Human hands. Repair hands. The kind that knew how to open broken housings and trace faults through wires nobody else wanted to crawl under a floor to reach. He had never expected those hands to become evidence in an alien crisis. "Female," he said. "Tired. Not weak. Just, worn down. Like somebody who had been carrying something too long." Veolira's gaze sharpened by a fraction. "Language? I do not know. I understood her anyway." "Emotion?" Ethan hesitated. He could have said fear. That would have been easy. It would have been close enough to true for most rooms. But not this one. Not with her. Not for herself, he said. It felt like she was trying to stop something. Or stop someone from turning her into something. The light ribbon on the table shifted color as it read his pulse. Veolira said nothing. That silence told him more than a denial would have. She knew enough to be disturbed. Maybe not enough to explain it, but enough to recognize the shape of danger. Then the room flickered. Just once. The ceiling light dimmed and returned. The device on the table gave off a brief note, high and clean. Ethan froze. The smell of rain on hot pavement flooded back so suddenly it almost made him dizzy. A corridor flashed behind his eyes. Blue walls. A transparent barrier. A hand on the other. Side. This time there was more. A phrase. Not spoken to him, but through him, as if memory had found his spine and used it as a wire. The first lie was choice. Ethan whispered the words before he even realized he was speaking. Veolira went still across from him. Completely still. Not even the controlled kind from before. This was deeper than discipline. This was recognition. Commander Veolira Thorne did not speak for so long that Ethan began to hear the room again. The low ventilation. The quiet electrical breath inside the table device. His own pulse, still not entirely his own anymore. The phrase he had spoken seemed to stay suspended between them like frost on glass. The first lie was choice. He had not meant to say it aloud. It had simply passed through him, arriving fully formed from whatever place the neural link had opened and refusing to remain hidden once it reached his mouth. Veolira's eyes held on him with a stillness that no longer felt procedural. This was not the look of an officer evaluating a subject. It was the look of someone standing at the edge of an old wound and realizing it had never healed clean. Ethan shifted in the metal chair. The cold had begun to settle into his back. "You know what that means," he said. It was not really a question. Veolira looked toward the opaque wall for one brief second, toward the counselors beyond it, then reached across the table and pressed her palm flat against the control strip. The translation ribbon shut off. The ceiling light dimmed by a shade. A second system, quieter and deeper, engaged with a soft descending tone Ethan had not heard before. Privacy. Real privacy this time, or as close as a place like this allowed. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Not softer. Just stripped of performance. "There are phrases," she said, "that exist only in the sealed histories." Ethan frowned. Sealed from who? From everyone who is expected to obey. The answer sat in the room like a blade left on a table between two people pretending not to look at it. Ethan leaned back carefully. His body still felt like it had been tuned a fraction off its normal settings. "So the machine is showing me classified history?" "No," Veolira said. "That would be easier." She drew one slow breath, and Ethan noticed for the first time that even she looked tired now. Not physically. Structurally. Like some internal support beam had begun to shift. "The phrase you repeated predates the modern empire. It comes from an account most officers are taught to dismiss as ceremonial myth." Ethan gave a faint dry laugh. "I am starting to think your myths have better records than your government." For the first time, something almost human crossed her face. Not humor exactly. Recognition, maybe, that he was still himself under all this. Then it was gone. "The origin texts say the link was never designed to choose rulers," she said. "It was designed to prevent them." Ethan felt the second heartbeat under the floor of his mind again. Steady. Waiting. He stared at her. "Then what is all this?" He lifted one hand, meaning the station, the hall, the candidates, the ceremony, the polished structure of selection and hierarchy built around an ancient thing that apparently wanted none of it. Veolira's gaze lowered to the dark table surface. "Inheritance," she said. "And revision." Before Ethan could ask more, a sharp chime cut through the private silence. A red line appeared across the control strip on the wall. Veolira turned instantly, all confessional openness gone, command returning to her posture like armor sealing shut. Another signal followed. Then another. The room's pale ceiling light shifted toward amber. Ethan did not know alien systems, but he knew emergency staging when he saw it. "What happened?" he asked. Veolira touched the wall panel, pulling a stream of encrypted text into the air. Her jaw tightened. "The council has transferred jurisdiction." "Meaning what?" She read one more line, and whatever she saw settled the matter behind her eyes. "Meaning they no longer intend to study compatibility." Ethan's throat went dry. "Then what do they intend?" Veolira looked at him fully now. There was no point in softening it, and he respected her for not trying. Extraction, she said. The word landed colder than containment had. Ethan sat very still. Somewhere in the station, systems were changing state. He could hear it now. Doors sealing. Access layers shifting. A distant hum deepening through the walls. The whole place was reorganizing itself around a decision made above his head. He thought of the voice inside the link. Do not let them use me again. It no longer sounded mysterious. It sounded specific. Can they do that? He asked quietly. Veilira answered with the smallest pause. Yes. And you? He did not know why he asked it that way. Maybe because she was the only person here who had told him even part of the truth. Maybe because he needed to know whether he was alone before the room finished closing around him. Veilira held his gaze. Then, with one precise motion, she deactivated the wall panel entirely. The opaque glass remained dark. The signals stopped displaying. She reached to the side of her belt, removed a slim access shard no bigger than a house key, and set it in Ethan's hand. The metal was warm from her body heat. When that door opens, she said, do not wait for permission. Ethan stared at the shard, then up at her. You are helping me. No, Veilira said, and for the first time her control carried anger instead of distance. I am correcting my first mistake. The outer lock gave a heavy mechanical click. Footsteps approached from the corridor. More than two. Ethan rose too fast and caught himself on the edge of the table, the room tilting for half a second before settling. Veilira stepped between him and the door. Blue light from the control strip caught the sharp outline of her shoulders. There is a service passage beyond the west maintenance spine, she said without turning. Follow the floor markings until they disappear. After that, trust the link. Ethan tightened his fingers around the shard. Why? The question came out smaller than he intended. Why risk this? Why him? Why now? Veilira's answer was so quiet he almost missed it. Because the weakest person in the room was the first one who asked who the voice belonged to. The door seal began to cycle open, and the station, the Empire, and whatever truth had slept inside that ancient machine all seemed to draw breath at once. The door had only opened 4 inches when Commander Veilira Thorne moved. Not with panic. Not with the frantic energy of someone improvising under fear. She moved with the clean, controlled speed of a person who had spent her whole life learning how to turn a second into a weapon without ever needing to raise her voice. Ethan Cole did not see exactly what she did at the threshold. He only saw the result. The first figure beyond the door stopped short. Another voice answered from farther back in the corridor. Veilira spoke in her own language, low and sharp, each word carrying the hard edge of command. Ethan caught none of the meaning, but he understood the function. Delay. Misdirect. Buy one narrow piece of time and force the world to fit inside it. He did not waste it. He crossed the room in 6 fast steps, found the west wall seam exactly where Veilira had said it would be, and pressed the access shard into a slot so fine he would never have seen it without the link humming under his skin. The panel gave a soft descending note and split open just wide enough for a person to pass sideways. Cold air met him from inside, dry and metallic, touched with dust older than the station's polished public halls. Ethan slipped through and the panel sealed shut behind him, leaving him in darkness so complete it felt physical. Then a thread of dim blue lighting woke along the floor. Service passage. Narrow, unfinished, real. The walls here were raw structural composite instead of ceremonial silver, ribbed with cable trunks and maintenance brackets. He could smell heated insulation, machine oil, and distant coolant, the honest smells of systems that kept beautiful places alive from beneath the floorboards. For the first time since the ceremony began, the environment made sense to him. Not politically. Not cosmically. Mechanically. He could work with mechanical. He moved quickly, one hand sliding along the wall for balance as the floor markings led him through a bend, then another. The passage was barely shoulder-wide in places. Duct vibration traveled through the panels in low steady waves. Somewhere above him, doors were sealing across multiple levels, their locking cycles echoing through the skeleton of the station like a giant heartbeat made of steel. He counted without meaning to. 22 steps. Turn. 12 more. Ladder drop, 8 rungs. Another corridor. The link's presence had changed since the interview room. It no longer felt like a distant pulse beneath thought. It felt closer now. More directional. As if something inside the station was not just connected to him, but guiding him by preference. At the next junction, the floor light split in 2 directions, left and right, identical in color and intensity. Ethan stopped, breathing hard. He listened. Left carried a faint hiss of pressurized air and a periodic mechanical click. Right carried silence, but under it, something else. A pull. Not sound. Memory. Rain on hot pavement. A hand on glass. He turned right. The passage widened after 50 feet into an engineering spine running the length of the lower sector. Here the ceiling rose enough that he could finally stand straight without ducking. Conduits ran overhead in thick black bundles. Maintenance monitors glowed along the wall, each one filled with alien symbols he could not read. He passed a service cart anchored beside an open panel and almost stopped from instinct alone. The exposed interior showed a lattice of relay boards and thermal lines. Broken things still called to him even now. That was who he was before this station, before this empire, before anyone mistook him for something larger than a repairman from Ohio. He fixed systems. He paid rent late. He lived quietly. The thought steadied him for exactly 3 seconds. Then the station lights shifted from blue to amber. A low tone rolled through the corridor. Another followed. This one translated over hidden speakers in flat, formal English. Network stability breach. Core synchronization failure at 12% and rising. Ethan stopped moving. The announcement repeated in 2 alien languages. Beneath it came a second line. Emergency override authorization pending council confirmation. He stared at the dark monitor nearest him as if it might offer context. Instead the link answered first. The world around him blurred, not visually this time but morally, as if some hidden layer had been peeled back. He saw flashes of the central chamber deep below the station. Vast. Circular. Built around a core far larger than the ceremonial relic above. Rings within rings. Light moving through them like thought through a brain. He felt strain there. Not mechanical strain. Human was the wrong word for it, but suffering was close enough. Too many minds forced into one pattern. Too much command where there should have been consent. The phrase from before returned with frightening clarity. The first lie was choice. Ethan understood then, not in complete detail, but enough. The ancient system was not failing because he had touched it. It was failing because something in it had recognized him and stopped obeying the people who had been using it. The empire had built its stability on a broken truth, and now the truth was moving. A panel on the far wall flashed red, then white. A schematic opened in his mind before he saw the shape on the screen. Central access spine. Emergency descent. Core chamber below. He did not know whether the map came from the station or the link or from some place where the two were no longer fully separate. He only knew it felt right in the same practical way a loose wire feels wrong the moment a good technician sees it. Ethan took one breath. Then another. He was tired. Shaky. In over his head on a level that language itself was failing to measure. Somewhere behind him, Veolira was probably still buying time with rank she had already spent. Somewhere above, a council that had never once looked at him and seen value was preparing to force a machine to submit again. And somewhere below, a voice that had waited longer than he could imagine was still asking not to be used. Ethan looked toward the emergency descent hatch. His reflection in its dark surface looked exactly like the man they had mocked in the hull. Thin. Pale. Unremarkable. Still trembling. He almost smiled at that. Then he placed his hand on the release plate, and the hatch unlocked as if it had been waiting for the weakest person in the room to finally decide. The emergency descent carried Ethan Cole down through the bones of the station like a thought too old to stop once it had finally started moving. The hatch sealed above him with a heavy magnetic thud, and then there was only the narrow platform under his feet and the cylindrical shaft opening beneath him in rings of dim blue light. He gripped the rail with one trembling hand as the platform lowered in controlled silence. The air grew warmer as he descended. Not comfortable. Alive. Charged with the faint metallic scent of active systems pushed too close to their limit. Far below, a vast circular glow widened through the center of the shaft, pale at first, then bright enough to paint the underside of his hands in silver blue. By the time the platform reached the bottom, Ethan was breathing hard, not from the ride, but from the feeling that the station had been built around this room the way a body is built around a heart. The core chamber was enormous. No hall above had prepared him for its scale. Concentric rings arched upward for what looked like 300 feet, each one threaded with moving light. Bridges of dark alloy crossed open space in precise lines, leading to suspended platforms and sealed control stations. At the center floated the true network core, not the ceremonial relic from the Hall of Selection, but its source, a sphere of interlocking luminous structures so vast and intricate it looked less manufactured than grown. Light moved through it in nervous pulses, stuttering now, uneven, as if the whole thing were trying to breathe through pressure. The second heartbeat Ethan had felt all day became impossible to ignore. It was everywhere here. In the floor. In the railings. In his teeth. He stepped off the platform and nearly staggered as a wave of sensation moved through him. Not pain. Not exactly. More like thousands of unfinished thoughts brushing past at once. Fear. Confusion. Grief. Memory. He understood then what the emergency announcement had failed to capture. This was never just a machine. It was a repository. A living vault built to hold minds in trust, not in chains. And someone had spent generations turning trust into control. Around the upper ring of the chamber, council stations were already activating. Figures moved behind transparent barriers, issuing commands into glowing interfaces. Ethan could not hear the words from this distance, but he did not need to. The posture was familiar. Tight shoulders. Precise gestures. People trying to force obedience back into a system that had remembered what it was for. A bridge extended from the central platform toward the core itself. It ended at a narrow circular dais with no visible controls. Ethan knew before he thought it that this was where he was meant to go. He walked out onto the bridge, each footstep sounding too small in a room this large. Halfway across, hidden speakers came alive. Unauthorized human presence confirmed. The same flat formal translation as before. Stand down and await retrieval. Ethan kept walking. The core's light shifted warmer as he approached, no longer cold blue but something softer threaded through it, almost white. The smell of rain on hot pavement returned, stronger than ever. Summer in Ohio after a dry week. The ache of heat lifting from blacktop under the first storm. Home. The memory nearly broke. Him. He had not realized until then how badly he needed something ordinary in the middle of all this. When he reached the dais, the chamber lights dropped by half. Every council station around the ring brightened in response. Ethan looked up and saw Commander Vaelira Thorne on the far upper platform, one hand braced against the rail, silver-edged uniform catching the chamber glow. She was too far away for him to read her expression clearly, but she was there. She had made it this far. That mattered more than he could explain. The core opened before him without a sound. Its outer lattice parted in slow deliberate lines, revealing a hollow center full of moving light. And within that light, for one impossible second, he saw her. Not a body. Not exactly. A pattern shaped like a woman standing behind translucent brightness, blue hand lifted the way he had seen it in fragments all day. Tired. Not weak. Waiting longer than anyone should have to wait. You came, the voice said inside him. Ethan's throat tightened. I did not know where else to go. Around the chamber, alarms shifted pitch. Control interfaces flared. The council had begun some final override sequence, flooding the outer rings with rigid pulses meant to force synchronization back into command. Ethan felt the pressure of it immediately, a hard unnatural rhythm trying to slam the network into one shape. The minds in the system recoiled from it. Not with noise. With suffering. That was the part he would remember later, if he remembered anything clearly at all. Not one scream. Not one grand dramatic shock. Just the unbearable weight of too many people being denied themselves at once. He stepped forward because there was nothing else to do. The light met him chest high, cool at first, then deep, entering not his skin but the space behind every thought. He did not try to control it. That was the difference. He did not reach for power. He reached for the fracture. For the strain. For the terrible tightness in the system where command had replaced consent. He thought, with all the plainness of the life he came from, that no wiring on Earth survived if you forced the wrong current through it forever. Something always burned. Something always failed. Unless you let each line carry only what it was built to hold. The realization spread. Through him and through the core at the same time. Ethan opened himself to the flood, not to own it, but to return it. Memory after memory passed through him in blinding fragments. A mother holding a child under a violet sky. A navigator seeing two moons rise over black water. A grieving officer standing alone in a corridor long after a war had ended. None of it stayed. That was the mercy. He let each one go where it belonged. Not to the council. Not to the empire. Back to its owner. Around the chamber, the rigid override pulses began to fail. Then the whole system changed. The stuttering rhythm softened. The scattered minds aligned not under pressure, but under release. The vast core brightened until the light filled every ring, every bridge, every wall seam in the room. Ethan dropped to one knee, breath gone, vision shaking at the edges. He could hear nothing now except the quiet inside the link where the woman's voice remained, no longer frightened. No longer asking to be spared. Only grateful. When the light finally settled, the chamber had gone still. Control stations across the upper ring darkened one by one. Council members stood in full view now behind transparent panels, not speaking, not commanding, simply watching the human they had planned to dissect kneeling at the center of the thing they no longer ruled. Ethan tried to rise and failed the first time. His hands were shaking too hard. A figure crossed one of the bridges at a measured pace and stepped onto the central dais beside him. Commander Veilira. She looked down at him, and in the new quiet of the chamber there was nothing left in her face of dismissal, rank pride, or imperial certainty. Only awe, and beneath it, something heavier. Shame, perhaps. Or respect strong enough to hurt. Slowly, with no audience left to impress and no ritual requiring it, she lowered herself to one knee beside him. Then another. Across the upper ring, others followed. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just enough to reveal that the truth had finally become heavier than their old posture. Ethan sat back on the cool metal floor and looked up through the open architecture of the chamber. Far above, beyond layered rings of light and the station shell wrapped around them, he could see a narrow section of the starfield through a transparent vault. Still. Distant. Untouched by empire. Commander Veilira's voice came quietly beside him, carrying none of the hard edges it wore in the hall. They searched for strength, she said. The link chose conscience. Ethan let the word sit there. He was too exhausted to answer with anything clever, and maybe that was for the best. He had never been the strongest man in any room. Not on Earth.